Then again this with regard to excerpt from the 663 official conversation excerpt of 6th of November 2016. Billy, again a question about Donald Trump. You said that the man is well-meaning, not badly, and in many things completely disinformed. What is meant by this? He is not stupid and not the bad man, as he will be scolded by his adversaries who will hurl against him and will also try to make uproar because they do not know all the shrewd thoughts and plans the opponent Hillary Clinton really has, by which it would trigger a worldwide catastrophe if it came to power. And in order for this to happen, fraudulent machinations are being launched after the election, in order to prove false election results, which Trump has illegally won his office. But what has become of this planned fraud, we have not yet investigated, which is why I cannot give any details. But as far as the election campaigns of Trump are concerned, they are, in the first instance, tenses which cannot be regarded as effective in their entirety, for the whole radical manifestation, as you have often called such speeches, is only halfway or not at all to be taken seriously because, as a rule, they are always relativized after an entry. Moreover, Trump is misinformed in certain matters which he represents, in terms of climate change, as well as Obama's care and others, but there is hope that he will be able to do better in this regard. This will in fact be the case, so that he will be instructed, and will also refrain from non-serious electoral campaigns, and will revise some unvaluations which, in his bogus election campaigns, correspond only to the purpose of platitudes. Billy, aha, that's behind your remark. 654. Contact discussion on June 16, 2016. Billy. See here, so this is what I have said here. What I need your help to correctly answer the reader's question, and I think that other people of the bulletin readers at the thing. In this case, I think it is necessary to explain when, how, and why values of the doctrine of the Spirit were integrated into the confused Buddhist doctrines. In my opinion, it would be necessary for you to provide more detailed information about how everything has turned out. You have already told me the whole thing in a private conversation, but I think that you can repeat the explanation explained to me in short form again and explain, because everything is more familiar to you than me. Yes, I can do that. The spiritual doctrine has brought two old Latin, distant descendants from the immigration power emigrated 1,300 years ago as emigrants to the east of the earth before 2,891 Earth years, RISP. To a larger group of Earth people living in a mountainous area of today's Burma RISP. Myanmar, note Billy, formerly Burma Myanmar. This group, comprising 309 female and male Earth people, formed a small order with a seminary, which had secretly remained until the beginning of the 20th century. This group was able to survive through the descendants of modern times, but different members moved from the community, mainly to the areas of the then North India. Beginning in 1814, however, the group began to die slowly as a result of frequent deaths. In 1850, the group consisted only of 32 persons of different ages. So is repeating to say that nearly 2,900 years ago at that time, the territory of today's Burma, where the doctrine of the Spirit was taught, a small secret order with a small training center was established, which consisted of nearly 2,900 years until 1917. My father, Svath, then, for about 50 years, had contact with the upper order leader, whom he often visited, and which he also taught in the Satipatthana meditation. At that time, the small order included 4 persons, of which the order leader died in 1907, followed by the remaining 3 religious orders, also in an advanced stage, thus ending the secret order. The then instructed Earth people of this group, which initially comprised 309 people, spread the doctrines brought to them on the one hand among their peers, but on the other hand also by leaving some of their homeland and taking the road to the then Nepal, North India, where they also spread the results, but with little success. In the end, The doctrine of the spirit has also spread to a group of interested parties, some of them interested in a group of those who were interested in it, and were preserved for around 530 years. The apprentices were called body for the sake of teaching and change means. The doctrine was preserved, and then by Siddhartha Gautama, but was not understood by him, and at his own discretion transformed into a completely alien and false doctrine, although he integrated into his imagination various good values of the doctrine of the spirit. Thus it is to be understood that the values of the spiritual doctrines, which are partly listed in the Buddhist religion, do not refer to the well-known Buddhism founded by Siddhartha Gautama about 6 centuries before Manual, Chr. Religion worldwide. This teaching tradition and religion, however, are not much better than any other religion with its heresies and fantasies because they are far from any reality and truth. So it is clear that what I wrote about the good and the positive in Buddhism is not the confused doctrine of the Siddhartha Gautama and thus not the well-known Buddhism itself, which has between 350 and 500 million adherents worldwide, especially in China, Bhutan, Japan, Cambodia, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Korea, Thailand, Tibet and Vietnam. My statements and explanations are based on the principle of Buddhism, enlightened awakening, which in the north of the early Burma of a larger group of people is called the doctrine of truth, the doctrine of the spirit, the doctrine of life RISP, and is now no longer widely taught because there are no bodies and supporters. This corresponds to what has been given since 1917. Excerpt from the 544th Official Contact Meeting of September 1, 2012, see FIGU Special Bulletin No. 71, Billy Alright, excuse, it remains secret. My interest is not to reveal secrets to me, for I really wanted to talk about the fact that not only the 4 natural forces known to Earth physicists, but also the remaining 3, which are still unknown to them, are certain tiny and ultra-tiny particles such as gravitation, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear force. Dark energy and dark matter are also included in the particle range. Some of these particles, which are also energies with forces, are to be discovered in the foreseeable future, as you have recently said. Although it takes something until then, the success is to be understood as your prediction, as a prediction. Besides, I may well say that in the elementary particles, say the normal or simple elementary particles, they contain, in 7 cases, even smaller particles, which, as I have learned from Svath, can be called, as it were, ultra-elementary particles. Even if I point out with this statement that there is a basic sieve chain of natural forces and that other particles exist in the already known and still unknown elementary particles, and that only then under this sieve series does that begin, from which everything originally originated from pure energy of the spirit, I will not confuse this with a secret, for the whole corresponds to the doctrine of the spirit, in which I also openly call these things. And since the earthly physicists, especially the particle physicists, lack the inner and basic knowledge of the true geistic energy structure of these things, they cannot begin with what I am talking about. It would probably be necessary to provide precise information and explanations so that the physicists could benefit from it. The physical knowledge of the true and fundamental structure and the exact connections of matter are still in the material realm of matter among physicists, for they have not yet become so clever that they had come to the thought that the origin of all matter, of all existence, and of the whole universe, cannot be explained simply from the purely material realm. Even the elementary particles, as such, are still purely material and not yet immaterial, in spite of their energetic minutiacy and inconspicuousness, for the intangible is purely spiritual, and only this energy is the absolutely only source of all things and all matter of every kind, everything that is solid, liquid, and gaseous, which can also be perceived by man, and can be measured and detected in various ways, as your father explained to me according to your physics. The fine material consists, however, of pure energy of the mind, and this is not comprehensible to man. And this energy of spirit alone is the origin of all the existence of those things which can be grasped, measured by man in any way, but to this day it is not yet possible and cannot be possible for a long time in the future is to demonstrate and measure the creaturely natural spirit energy. But since those terrestrial physicists, who are concerned with the origin of life, and thus also with the solid, liquid, and gaseous matter, and try to fathom all this, even the least knowledge of the spirit energy is missing from the absolute origin everything has emerged and emerged, they are still very far from researching and discovering how the process of materialization results from purely spiritual energy. Like children who are angry in their food and do not find what they like, earthly physicists are poking around in an area where they cannot find the real origin of all things. It is, of course, necessary to recognize the pure material aspects of matter, and to use these knowledge properly, so as not to create disaster, but if the true origin of all things is to be recognized, in the spirit energy. This, however, has nothing to do with what is erroneously described by the man of the earth as a spirit, which as such is to embody what human consciousness is. The mind-rasp. The energy of the mind is not the consciousness, for the spirit or the spirit energy does not think and creates no intellectual property, for this is solely the material consciousness. Seen the end of the Supermarket USA? Extracts from the 544th Official Contact Meeting of September 1, 2012, FIGU Special Bulletin No. 71, Billy aha, then this evil can be avoided by the rationals of the USA population. But with the US, the whole thing cannot go on forever until Barack Obama came, thanks to the end of the Iraqi invasion and the elimination of Osama bin Laden, as well as the huge humanitarian progress for the American people, the comprehensive health insurance which Romney wants to abolish. If I consider what you have entrusted to me in 1975 on my grand journey, the supermarkets of the USA could come to an end after the year 2020, according to your probability calculations, if until then in that state nothing changes for the better and if continues with the USA alienated from this state, or even become open enemies, then Obama might be the jumping point that this can still be prevented, right? How that could be so. But what is also to be followed by the Obama successors and what internal and external policies they are doing, because this is also determined by what will be after 2020. Billy, at that time, in 1975, you mentioned, on the one hand, the tremendous contradictions in politics, business, military affairs, the decay of culture and the growing religious and sectarian system, and the serious criminal acts or even crimes of the old presidents of the USA, and said that if these things were to be muddled in the same and still increasing frame, the collapse could not be avoided. I've noticed all this and I can really understand if it is as you have calculated. You also said that when the US collapsed, China would be able to move on to the next world and supermarket, but this would fundamentally require that China should have strong allies, because they would be necessary to have enough influence as a supermarket and to be able to exist as such a tool. But an economic power, such as China, which depends on the world economy, you have explained, is not enough to be a supermarket. But greatness might lead to catastrophic trials and global warfare to gain a supermarket position. If, however, the giant state debt of more than $16 trillion is considered in relation to the United States, which can no longer be repaid, and for which the current interest can only be applied scarcely or even once more, the dumbest ones recognize how the US is. But America is not there alone, because one has only to think of Germany, France, England, Spain and Italy, etc., which are equally misguided and have billions of debt. It is becoming more and more likely that the United States will lose its supermarket status and its allies will turn away from them. This is also due to the fact that Obama has long since ceased to be the man he was in his first term of office, since he has obviously succumbed to the constant insinuations of his war-crying environment and has had to throw a large part of his ideals overboard. The following article shows that the decline of the US is becoming more and more apparent. Kim Wolf, Germany. Question: is it possible that you can learn more about the four groups whose UFOs are cited again and again, and which are sometimes mentioned in the contact talks? U. Knut, Germany. Answer: this question can be answered with the following contact report extract of May 3, 2016. Billy, thank you. We have always talked about the so-called UFOs, and also about the four groups that are traveling around the world with. And to these four groupings belong also the group of which, however, are really to be divided into two groups, as you have already told me at the beginning of our contacts in private talks. Your daughter Sam Jays has already talked about this, but also Quetzal and yourself, which was never published in conversation reports, because it was always private. Only in more recent times, when you have made certain observations and gained clear insights, and you have come to certain proofs, have you said anything openly about it? I would now like to ask the extent to which we are now allowed to talk more openly about the fact that the grouping of the Gchitarai corresponds to two groups, and why you call it so and only as a grouping, although it is actually there too? There was, in fact, no direct secrecy, but it was a matter for us not to speak openly about it until we knew more precisely. As Earth Future, we call the one grouping because it is an effective Earth Future one. In a distant future, exists on the Earth and comes by time bridges to the present time. Billy, pardon, with time bridging, do you mean time travel, as we say? In this case, the term Earth Future, in this case means the Earthlings of the distant earthly time, which are already living in the distant future, and which are brought into our presence by the possibility of their time travel technique with their various small and large futuristic aircraft. However, this is also done by the others who have their nationality in a certain subterranean territory and possesses a general futuristic technique, and so also with regard to aircraft. These airplanes, which I just call your sense, are completely futuristic for the present time and the earthly and technical development. Progressive, innovative, progressive, directional, forward-looking, and so on. With regard to this second grouping, which you also call Earth Future, it can be said that these Earth Future originate not from the remote Earth Future, are also no direct, but indirect, very distant offspring of extraterrestrials, who are deep underground people under the Earth's surface, who, with their futuristic aircrafts, also circulate in terrestrial airspace, as you have explained to me. And this is very often, and most interestingly, in the Western Hemisphere, which, as an imagined Western Hemisphere, is designated geographically by this concept, as a counterpart to the Eastern Hemisphere, respectively. Earth Hemisphere. The two imaginary ground hemispheres hemispheres, if I remember correctly, are separated by the 0-degree reference meridian at Greenwich and the so-called anti-meridian at 180 degree. Accordingly, the territories west of London, West Africa and the whole of North and South America, Patagonia, Greenland, and Canada belong to the Western Hemisphere, where most of the sightings of very different small and large and even huge UFOs futuristic flight objects of the inner Earth. I would be interested in why this is so, because in the Eastern Hemisphere such futuristic airplanes UFOs are less often observed, especially in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand and Oceania, which are counted to the Eastern Hemisphere. To this end, it is still to be said that the Western Hemisphere is often associated with the New World, respectively, according to the so-called Monroe Doctrine of 1823, is equated with America and the neighboring island states, or politically delineated by the member states of NATO. What you are saying is correct, and the justification of why the earthly ones coming from the Earth's future are operating in the Western Hemisphere, is to be justified. Billy, but why? That is the question. Do you call these Earth dwellers, also of whom we have often spoken, and which you have always mentioned only in this way without giving an explanation? This is simply not clear to me. as is not why you have never talked about it and never defined the term. The reason for our designation is that the entire technique of the inhabitants of the Earth-like state corresponds to a future earthly technique, which will only begin in the coming time, and will only become a reality in a distant future. And that we never talked about it in detail and made no explanations, that was because you never asked in your restraint, you always kept your attention to our directives. We have greatly appreciated this, and besides, you have never been driven by curiosity that could embarrass us with regard to our directives. And what we have ever told you, including secret things, always came out of necessity, but we could always rely on you to keep the word to silence under all circumstances. Billy, well, we do not have to talk about it, because my question you have answered yes, therefore it no longer needs. Then again one question, are the three that I have met in, as well as the two in, so members of this, as you call her by her real name? If so, they live in the subterranean state structure in the area of . This is also true, but there is a duty of secrecy. Billy, you've told me so many times, and I'll stick to it. But what we have just said, can be official, right? We can continue to talk about it openly, but no names or places can be named. And it must also be clear that we do not continue to enter into any contact with these groups. Billy, for what I know your reasons. On the title theme, the following excerpt from the 588th official contact meeting of Wednesday, June 4, 2014, Also regarding the international excerpts on the death penalty, which was sneaky introduced by the EU dictatorship without the populations of the individual EU states and other countries have learned about it. The internet excerpts, which you asked Florina to convey to me, I have read in detail. Billy, we were talking about the lousy EU action already on 5 April, that the EU dictatorship had secret plans in place in the event of unrest with military violence against the EU's population, that by the military also the killing of demonstrators, etc. accepted RISP is arranged. In any case, this is clear from what you said when I raised a forecast on the future situation in Europe. Our conversation was as follows. Excerpt from the 584th official contact meeting of 5th of April 2014. Billy, I think that it will be so. But I now have a different question, because I have read something, namely a forecast of the future situation, which in the next years in Europe RISP in the European Union is threatened. We are not talking openly about political affairs for a long time, but this is the dictatorship of the EU, which I would personally like to know, in the interests of people who ask me, how the peoples stand finally, to fight against this hypocritical dictatorship. It is indisputable that there have been social unrest in various EU countries for quite some time, which are already precursors for further and steadily intensifying unrest, which in the coming years are increasingly threatening to spread in many EU countries, and even to civil war-like conditions. And since the reason for the bulk of the Swiss had spoken and won a clear word with regard to the mass immigration initiative, many citizens of the EU states have been frightened by their lethargy and EU bondage and have realized how unfair they are in the EU dictatorship. As a result, the EU's people's risk is already estimated to be 27% in the case of preparatory riots in civil war-like forms. The fact is that not only in the EU dictatorship and in all the supposedly democratic states that belong to it, but also secret plans exist, as well as in non-EU countries all over the world, which result in the fact that if the already threatened insurrections erupt, then no longer the police should provide for order, but that effective everything should be suppressed with evil military force, as is the case in many places in other countries of the EU. Us America's Election Campaign 2016 excerpt from the 663 interview between Ta and Billy from November 6, 2016. Billy: but what I want to ask now is that you have told me quite some time ago that in the US the ever most primitive election battle around the US, The presidency was fortunately decided that the majority of the U.S. population would choose the lesser evil, thus avoiding a world war. But I should be silent about this because the walls in the center had ears, so that everything would be carried out into the world and thus also carried to us America, which would not be good and could adversely affect the election process if certain elements came behind it that the Clinton is and Trump comes to the helm. It would have been really dangerous if you had told me something, for there would have been very unpleasant and dangerous turmoil in certain inner government circles and certain secret services, if they had known what I entrusted to you. There would have been no choice of election manipulations, as well as life-threatening attacks against Trump, both in the form of intelligence and from the ranks of Democratic fanatics. He would not have received any help from the Republican Party, even though he was a member of the Republican Party. But if I wanted to disclose my opinion on his conduct, he would have to say that he was actually representing a party of his own party. As you have rightly judged him, he is at least a chaos and a disaster man as a campaigner in his election campaign motives. But I must say that he is otherwise well-meaning and not bad, also with regard to Russia and Putin, with whom he will honestly seek a peaceful political, military, and economic agreement. This, in contrast to Clinton, who has sneaky and evil war thoughts against Russia and therefore first in Syria to carry out military actions against the fighting Russian military forces and also to carry out even warlike attacks against Russia. It is a fact about her ideas of attack, which she as a Putin and a Russian enemy has long cherished and will also realize. And if she won the presidential election, an atomic war would be inevitable. Fortunately this will not happen, as I told you on June 30th. Of course, the world will be shocked the next Wednesday when Trump wins the election because his speech was and is not the most cultivated, but he has good approaches in various directions that he intends to realize as us president when given by his consultants and who are not intervening between them, who want to direct him according to their scheme, and are determined to do so in certain respects, as was the case with all us presidents and will continue to be. If he does, however, he will fight against globalization and against the fact that the USA, as before, interferes too much in foreign states and thus neglects the order in its own country, but rebuilds it. But that to prove the extent to which he is able to carry through his basic ideas, because besides him, all the power possessed around him, which will not allow him to act freely, but will try to control him at his own discretion, as was the case with Obama, who lacked the necessary to be able to get through. And because Trump is not an actual politician, but a man of business, he will have a strong position in his own government in this respect. This will also be the case with regard to foreign policy, whereby the machinations of the EU dictatorship will also be decisive, because when he has presided over the presidency, the latter will strive to restore the close relations and connections lost to him through his election to the White House and to the U.S. government through new negotiations. And, as I know, the EU dictatorship will try to pull the United States on its side and, with it, bind a political, economic and military power coalition, where a coalition will be tried very early on, as soon as the first shock passes, who meets the dictatorship that expects Donald Trump but Hillary Clinton to win the election, which is engaging and pleasing to the EU dictatorship. Billy, we shall now see what is going on, and I do not doubt that your prediction of June was correct, and the disaster man. The lesser evil the US presidency wins, just Trump. Billy, another question about Donald Trump. You said that the man was good-natured, not bad, and in some respects completely disinformed. What is meant by this? He is not stupid and not the bad man, as he will be scolded by his adversaries who will hurl against him and will also try to make uproar because they do not know all the shrewd thoughts and plans the opponent Hillary Clinton really has, by which it would trigger a worldwide catastrophe if it came to power. As far as the election campaigns of Trump are concerned, they are, in the first instance, tenses which cannot be regarded as effective in their entirety, for the whole radical manifestation, as you have often called such speeches, is only halfway or not at all serious, as these are usually always relativized after an entry. Moreover, Trump is misinformed in certain matters which he represents. In terms of climate change, as well as Obama's care and others, but there is hope that he will be able to do better in this regard. Billy: aha, that's behind your remark. Which I should have better explained. Billy: what is done now, so do not make it a problem.